Well, welcome to the museum. I'm Denise Snell, and I'm the education coordinator here at the museum. And it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Martin today. She is actually a professor over at Northeastern State University. Did I say that right? Mm-hmm. Okay, good. Because I was worried I might leave out a word or two there. The subject that she's speaking about today is related to the Civil War in the Cherokee Nation. And she has experience in several different states as a professor, and I think probably the most exciting thing that I'm interested in hearing about today is her research. I'm a research buff. So, Dr. Martin, if you would come up.
Good afternoon. I'm so happy to be here. I want to thank Shayla for the invitation, and I appreciate you accommodating me on a Friday. As a professor, I teach Tuesday, Thursday all day, and so Fridays work a little better in my schedule. And actually, I consider Bartlesville to be my adopted, this is my adopted Oklahoma hometown, so I'm always happy to be home. Just like I consider Fort Scott my adopted hometown from when I lived in Kansas. So today I want to share with you some research that I started doing of all the things while I was working on my PhD dissertation. Anybody who likes to do research knows you go to the archives, you're looking for things for your dissertation, and then you find something else intriguing, and it's like historians were a bit like squirrels. It's like diary, really cool letters, and you go off in these different directions, and someone has to go, hey, back to the dissertation research. Oh yeah, that thing. So, because these other things are so much more fun sometimes. So, I want to take you on a journey into the past, and our roadmap today for this trip is very unlikely. It's a 28-year-old widow with 5 children to clothe, feed, and protect by herself during a time of war. So how can a widow who has been dead since 1917 speak to historians today and in the future about the Civil War in the boundaries of the Cherokee Nation? In the case of Hannah Worcester Hicks Hitchcock, that answer is simple. A very diminutive little diary that lasts for almost an entire year, and a handful of letters she wrote to her sister in the 1870s after the conclusion of the war. So what Hannah's writing might lack in volume, it more than makes up for in content, observation, and insight into one of the most destructive times for the 5 southeastern nations. And for those not aware, that would be the Cherokee, the Chickasaw, the Choctaw, the Muskogee, and the Seminole people during the Indian Territorial period. I have to switch the slides. And this is Hannah, of course, when she's an older woman. Hannah Worcester was born in New Echota, Cherokee Nation on the 29th of January, 1834. She was the daughter of the famed Presbyterian missionary Samuel Austin Worcester of the landmark U.S. Supreme Court decision Worcester v. Georgia that affirmed tribal sovereignty for the Cherokee people over how to conduct affairs within their reserve lands in Georgia. However, with the Indian Removal Act of 1830, Hannah's young life, like those of many of her Cherokee friends, was uprooted. Young life, like those of many of her Cherokee friends. On April 8th, 1835, the Worcester family left the safety of the Brainerd Mission in Tennessee to join the Cherokee in their new homelands in the Indian Territory. Nothing would stop her family from their educational and religious labors among the Cherokee. When she arrived, the family settled at Dwight Mission for a short time, which is not too far from Sallisaw. Later, they may have moved their household goods and a massive printing press that Samuel utilized to spread the gospel and other information among the Cherokee to the Union Agency, which was near present-day Muskogee, and then to Park Hill, near present-day Tahlequah, their final mission post. So here, Hannah and her siblings attended the Park Hill Mission School and sat in desks alongside other Cherokee students, and they formed close friendships with them. One young student at Park Hill, Abijah Hicks, a young man from a prominent Cherokee family, became a surrogate son to Samuel Worcester, as his own sons and elder daughters returned to the United States. Remember, this is Cherokee Nation. So they return to the United States when they are older to get their extended education. So Abijah formed this close attachment to Hannah, and the two wed in January of 1852. Their family grew, and by the time Hannah's father died in 1859, Hannah, Abijah, and their children were living peacefully at the old mission. Hannah loved spending time in the old print shop where she had assisted her father in his endeavors. In a gender role reversal, Abijah farmed and eventually converted one of the mission buildings into a mercantile store that provided additional income for his family. And also much needed supplies for Cherokee families. Really quickly, within the 5 southeastern nations, women's work included the actual agricultural work. Women were considered, quote unquote, the owners of the homes and of the agricultural fields that the families cultivated. And so that was part of women's labor. And so Abijah was kind of flipping the script. He was taking on agricultural labor that normally would not have been conducted by Cherokee men, or for men in the Muskogee, in the Seminole, the Choctaw, and Chickasaw worlds as well. Abijah's running his store. By 1861, the Hicks family welcomed their 5th child, just as war unleashed its fury upon the nation. The Cherokee Nation, along with their southeastern brethren, found themselves caught between multiple fires. They would have to choose to side with the Union, the Confederacy, or remain neutral in the conflict. For Hannah and Abijah, the choice was clear. They supported the abolition of enslaved peoples and firmly stood behind the federal government. Sadly for Hannah and Abijah, this choice endangered them as the Cherokee Nation would fracture. As the Cherokee Nation and its families squared off against one another in the Civil War, many non-Cherokee residents who possessed the means to travel opted to evacuate, or refugee, to use their term, to places of safety. Many of Hannah's family opted to move out of the Indian Territory. Her sister-in-law, Sarah Hicks, married Spencer Seago Stevens, a Cherokee who served in the Union Army. Hannah relied upon Sarah for much support and comfort as the war pressed down upon their once peaceful community. In addition, Hannah assisted her brother-in-law, Dr. Hitchcock, as he struggled to raise his daughter after the death of his wife, Sarah, who just happened to be Hannah's sister. Hannah utilized her connections to Cherokee families, both Union, neutral, and Confederate, and attempted to create a sense of community and cohesion despite all of the chaos that was rocking the Cherokee Nation. And so she's got her husband for support, her family members, but many of them are leaving. Her sister Ann Eliza, who was living and working at the Tallahassee Mission, which was over near present-day Muskogee. She and her family go to Kansas and then to Illinois. So a lot of, and the 5 nations actually kind of issued a directive to non-native citizens during the war. They said, we just can't protect you. You really need to leave because we cannot guarantee your safety. We're going to have a hard time taking care of our own people, let alone other folks. And in this time period, just so you know, non-native settlement was prohibited in the Indian Territory among the 5 nations. If you were someone who was not native and you were living here, it meant that you were working as a missionary, you were a teacher, you maybe had a government contract to run a trading post, so you had some connection and basically sanction from the government. So all of those folks are being told you need to leave, and most of them do. But Hannah, being married to Abijah, a Cherokee citizen, she has her children, she's going to stay. So, and also she doesn't want to abandon her brother-in-law. Her brother-in-law, even though he is a white individual, he was a contract surgeon to the military and was stationed at Fort Gibson. So he was seen as providing a service that was needed by the military. And he also assisted Cherokee and Muskogee families as well. So, when I first read Hannah's diary, and you see a sample of her handwriting right there. When I first read this diary in the summer of 2019, I knew this little volume that only covered a year in her life contained not only her personal pain, but great insight into the nature of the war in the Cherokee Nation. Hannah's diary is part of the archival collections at the Helmrich Center for American Research at the Gilcrease Museum in Tulsa. Over the past 30 years, women's diaries and their usefulness and their validity as historical sources has opened new avenues of scholarship and academic exploration and interpretation. Hannah's diary is really an internal monologue where she kind of is talking to herself, an accounting of facts and information, and an interesting thing, a series of annotations. If you've read books that have footnotes, really what Hannah does, she creates her own version of footnotes, where she puts little symbols at the end of a sentence, and then you go to the back of the diary, and you find the symbol, and then some additional notes that she's written down. So it tells you that she's written her daily entries, and then she's thought more and reflected more, and then she's added little symbols and added additional information. And as we move on, I'll explain to you why I think she was doing that. So all of these things together provide some interesting context. Given the tone of the diary entries, we will find, sadly, she has a generally morose outlook on life from 1862 to 1863. She clearly did not believe she would live to see the end of the war. Her annotations were titled, "Notes for Further Information to Sister Ann Eliza," indicated that Hannah intended to send the diary to Ann Eliza Worcester Robertson, her sister, who herself was a scholar, teacher, and translator of the Bible, hymns, and other texts into the Muskogee language, who refugeed to Illinois during the war. When I combine this with letters that she wrote to her sister, the diary outlines the fears and challenges Cherokee families faced during the war. And the first obstacle she's going to face is the murder of her husband. On July 4th, 1862, Abijah left Hannah and their 5 children alone in Park Hill. He set off for Van Buren, Arkansas. He traveled to Van Buren on a regular basis to procure supplies and merchandise for his store. Hannah noted in her diary that Van Buren was, quote, festooned with Confederate banners, but there is considerable Union support underneath. She and Abijah most surely believed that he would make his usual trip, and he would return home with his wagon full of goods. Sadly, this was not to be. On the Sabbath of August 7th, 1862, Hannah wrote, "Oh, what a year to remember this year will ever be to me and to us all. We thought we had some trouble last year, but how happy was that compared to this?" She continued, "But this year, on the 4th of July, my beloved husband was murdered, killed, away from home, and I could not see him. So far from it, he had been buried 24 hours before I even heard of it. Buried without a coffin, all alone, 40 miles from home. Alas, alas, my husband. Still the cry of my heart every day and every hour is, oh, my husband." She continued, "My husband left home and I saw him for the last time, riding in his little wagon past the garden corner on the 30th of June, the anniversary of our dear Sarah's death." And Sarah, who she's speaking about, is her sister, Sarah Worcester, who was married to Dr. Hitchcock at Fort Gibson. From Hannah's perspective, Abijah did not receive a burial befitting a good Christian man. The Civil War disrupted so many facets of normal grieving, and the residents of the Cherokee Nation were not immune from the war's impact upon death rituals. Civil War scholar Drew Gilpin Faust, in her extensive study, This Republic of Suffering, chronicled how families adapted to their loved ones' deaths that often took place hundreds of miles from home. After Abijah's assassination, Hannah called upon the kindness of a neighbor who saddled 2 mules and attempted to help her find his final resting place. With her youngest child, Herbert, a baby who was ill, in her arms, Hannah rode around the area where Abijah was said to have been murdered to no avail. she could not locate his grave. Hannah routinely lamented the fact no words were preached over his body, no prayers said for his soul, and his grave was unmarked and unattended. On January 29, 1863, she wrote, "I fear that I shall never see my husband's grave. Oh, I do so long to go there, to see where he is laid at least, but it is impossible. It is a comfort to know that he is not distressed now by anything we may have to suffer." And she begins to chronicle in her diary not only her own losses, but also the losses that were suffered by families around her. She was not the only woman who lost a husband, father, son, uncle, or brother in the Cherokee Nation. In October 1862, she noted that a friend, Mr. Bishop, was murdered under the guise of combat. She wrote, "We cannot see why two such good men as my husband and Mr. B should have been allowed to be murdered and have their poor wives and little ones left helpless." Another friend, Mr. Spears, was murdered. Hannah noted the efforts of his widow to locate his remains. "William Spears was killed some weeks ago. His wife has been searching until yesterday. She succeeded in finding a part of the bones and remnants of his clothing. Spears was taken out, told to pray, kneeled, and was shot in the head." All told, Hannah documented the deaths of 14 individuals she personally knew due to murder, mistreatment at the hands of Confederate soldiers, disease, or malnourishment. For survivors, life without their loved ones brought sorrow and danger. Oops. She also is going to talk a great deal as she navigates life without her husband about different raids and destruction that take place. When any time was quiet and too calm, Hannah's anxiety ramped up as she feared the challenges ahead. At the end of July 1862, she wrote, "On the night of, or rather the 31st of July, 1st of August, our house was burnt down. That was the first great trial that my husband was not here to share with me. But truly, I hardly felt it a trial. So very little did it seem compared with what I had suffered in losing him in such a terrible way. Oh, for grace to submit and a right spirit to every trial. I believe my heart is almost dead within me." This would be the first time Hannah and her children were burned out of their home. Sadly, more burnings were in her future. For Hannah, and they found themselves at the mercy of federal, Confederate, and indigenous troops that seemed keener to line their own pockets and ride off unmolested. Her diary's pages are full of stories of women and children left with no food or shelter after being raided and robbed. The Pins, the P-I-N-S, the Pins, Cherokee Union supporters, saw fit to steal from pro-Confederate and neutral Cherokee families. She wrote, the Pins have been robbing some of their enemies. Mr. Foreman's house here, and Mrs. J. Foreman, Mrs. Lipe, Mrs. Jessie Wolfe, and Mrs. Tiger at Tahlequah were all robbed. They were molested and harassed multiple times. On December 17, 1862, she wrote, "Today we have had the experience in being robbed, as I expected. As soon as it was light, they came and began. They took many valuable things and overhauled every closet, trunk, box, and drawer that they could find. The leaders were Cherokees, those who have often eaten at my house, some of them." When we look at her little footnotes to her sister, she continued, "So many things the robbers took that I would regret so much if I felt that the loss of anything less than life itself was worth regretting now. 3 barrels of sugar, all my nice blankets, most all of my quilts, sheets, pillowcases, towels, and tablecloths, my tablespoons all but one. Oh, and that large, pretty white bedspread that Mrs. Ross, the wife of Cherokee Chief John Ross, gave her. So many little things that I most highly prized out of my bureau drawers, ribbons, sewing silk, pins, needles, thread, and buttons. They overhauled and opened your letter box, which was under my bed. They took some letters and some little things of Mrs. Van's that I had put in to save. Mr. Foreman had some things left here to save them from the Pins. They even tore the trimming off of Susie's bonnets." Of course, the greatest of all of her losses was her husband, Abijah. But her diary at times reads like an insurance claim as she enumerated each robbery that she was able to verify. One robbery, she noted, resulted in the death of a woman and her child because the woman refused to leave her home and allow Confederate troops to occupy it and use it for their purposes. The raiding and pillaging that took place in the Cherokee Nation forced many women and children to flee the region. Hannah noted each of those departures with sadness because that circle of friends was getting smaller and smaller and smaller, and therefore the female support that she needed was evaporating every day. Her sister-in-law, Sarah Hicks Stevens, feared for her life, given her husband's service in the Union Army with the Indian Home Guards. She packed her children and their meager belongings and fled to Neosho, Missouri, where many Cherokee families, most of them mixed bloods, congregated together. Hannah wrote, "So we separate, perhaps never to meet again in this world. Oh, this cruel, cruel war." So with every raid, Cherokee families are going to suffer. Armies, as we know, marched on their stomachs. As Union, Confederate, and Indigenous troopers made their way from the Cherokee Nation from 1862 to 1863, Hannah chronicled the suffering and privation she witnessed around her. With every robbery, Cherokee families lost not only possessions, but much needed food and medicine. Troops in need of provisions helped themselves to flour, sugar, coffee, cattle, chicken, eggs, and hogs from local families without the regard for the dietary needs of the civilian population. Women who were left to tend the home front appealed to political and military leaders directly for assistance. When Union Colonel William A. Phillips, commander of the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd Regiments of Indian Home Guard, arrived at Fort Gibson in December 1862, Hannah braved wintry weather conditions and traveled to speak with him personally. Foes and friends. Yesterday, Colonel Phillips passed again with a large force. I spent last night in the camp 6 miles from where the road to Gibson is, having gone there to see Colonel Phillips, to beg him to find some way of deliverance from the dangers that surround us when the Federals are not here. They have gone on today, earnestly hoping to come up with the enemy and to capture some wagons. The colonel said he could not tell whether he will even come back this way or not. He seemed to wish to help us if he could. She left very disappointed and despondent. She had hoped that Phillips would return with wagons loaded with food and medicine to alleviate civilian suffering. Sadly for Hannah and many others, Phillips did not return. With foodstuffs running low and women and children were desperate. On the 21st of January, 1863, Hannah noted, Lieutenant Colonel Downing with 200 or 300 men came down to bring flour to the needy. An eager crowd of hungry women and children soon gathered to receive it. She shared the experience of a Cherokee man, Mr. Palmer, who narrowly escaped capture by the Confederates. Mr. Palmer came, almost one raised from the dead. So narrow was his escape. He hobbled along on a stick with the ball, meaning the musket ball, still in his leg, with nothing to eat but 1 ear of corn for 4 days. By February, Colonel Phillips finally made good on his promises to assist families. On February 20th, 1863, Hannah wrote, "Since I wrote here, Colonel Phillips has twice again sent flour for the suffering people. He is trying to do much for the Cherokees." Sadly, his assistance was too little too late for many families. The young and the elderly suffered from malnourishment, and not one family in Hannah's diary survived the war unscathed without losses. For many women left at home, the privation took the form of lost labor, with male family members serving in the military or imprisoned or in hiding. Women took on tasks they expected their male family members to do. One such role men fulfilled included home security. Hannah quickly learned how important safety was after a late night encounter in June of 1862. The night after my husband left home for the last time, just after I'd gone to bed, I saw a man, by the lightning was flashing constantly, trying to raise the window of the corner room. I lay and watched till I saw him plainly, standing and trying the window. Then I called to Jess and Joe in the dining room. They run out and insisted I should get a gun in the corner of my bedroom. As I thought it would do no harm to give the man a fright, I went to get it. And as I raised it, the trigger caught and the gun went off. So close to my head, I felt the warmth of the blaze against my ear. That was the beginning of terror and sorrow to me. I never saw my husband to tell him of it, and there have I stayed alone with my fearful thoughts ever since. I thought so much how he would feel to hear of my narrow escape, but oh, it was only like a warning of what was to come to him. That night, only the first of many, through which I should lie and start up many times from a dream of guns firing at him and myself. So, of course, she now has to tend to the physical security of her family. With Abijah dead, Hannah learned how to chop wood, haul water, and fretted over planting and harvesting crops. She wrote, I went today to help get a load of wood, which makes me remember my husband with renewed sadness, as I think how I know he would never consent while he lived that I should do such work. Oh, the sad changes that this year's course has brought to pass. In September of 1862, she hauled wheat and bolted flour, much to her surprise. Heavy manual labor like hauling water, wood, and flour were new things for Hannah. Her pursuits, cooking, cleaning, sewing, reading, tending to their children, lined up with Anglo-American female gender roles. The addition of these male-centered gender roles exerted and overtaxed her emotionally and physically. She did rely upon the kindness of friends and strangers, and sometimes hired laborers to help. In the cold, stormy weather, I had to chop and carry wood, all that I could endure, which wasn't much. We had no wood and nobody to get it but Percy, and on the Sabbath, some of the black men brought me a little. Oh, sad time when it comes to hauling wood for me on the Sabbath. But she was not the only woman that endured this. But whether they realized it or not, these women were experiencing a form of empowerment as they performed male-centered roles in Cherokee society. For Hannah, the adoption of Abijah's workload and role within the family structure didn't bring much comfort or joy. She wanted her husband by her side with her family as they weathered the storms of the war. As Hannah adapted to life without Abijah, her thoughts turned to their time together and her own sense of self-worth. Her identity was so connected to her roles as being a wife and a mother and an educator and a Christian. Now that she was no longer a wife, who was she? That was a huge portion of her life that was missing. So at this point, her diary is really full of very acerbic self-examination. Just a few weeks after her husband died, she wrote, "This is the 9th Sabbath I've been a widow. 2 sad, weary months. How many times in the past days have I wondered what my future would be, wished that I could have some idea. But oh, I did not think it would be as it is. Left a widow at 28 with 5 children growing up around me, and oh, most dreadful of all, my dear husband murdered. Oh, the bitter, bitter repentance for my unkindness to him. I might have done better. I might have grieved him less. But the only comfort is he is happy now. He sorrows not for anything I have done. Nothing can dim the brightness of his crown of rejoicing. Oh, may I be forgiven and enabled to live and train our precious children, that we shall at least join him there. He loved his children so. Never a father better loved his children. I love to think of it, but oh, how we miss him." And this entry, the full trauma of Abijah's death, is on display. She noted some of her unkindness to him and indicated that she in some way had caused him grief or distress during their marriage. She never elaborated in her diary about the transgressions. Given the fact Hannah was raised in an Anglo-American home that stressed these very strict gender roles and religious conventions, it is likely that despite Abijah's adoption of Christianity, that their cultures clashed with one another in one way or another. After Abijah's murder, Hannah was left to sift through her conflicted feelings about their time together. One aspect of the good death in the 19th century Christian culture, it called for survivors to speak no ill of the deceased. In Hannah's case, she took that directive a step further and heaped condemnation upon herself. Perhaps this was her way of ensuring that Abijah's death was marked properly in some way, since he had no funeral rites and his place of final rest was unknown. She also worried about her children and their education and their souls and their future. And that was a continual thread that ran through her diary. She wrote in September of 1862, I'm so cast down, so discouraged. I don't see how we are to live. And my children, I'm not training them up as I should. I do not pray half enough for the grace which alone can help me. And I fail every day and every hour. Oh, for strength of mind and body too. What a worthless life I do live. I do not make the effort that I might to do something. So for Hannah, productivity, good works, charity, and active participation in the rearing of her children was the equivalent of success. Given the depths of her grief and the shock and the despair, she was at times frozen and unable to tend to her children. She had cycles of inactivity, self-loathing, and despair, and then she would have periods where she was extremely productive. By 1864, her self-loathing had not disappeared. She wrote a series of letters to her sister, Ann Eliza, who was in Illinois. She wrote them from Fort Gibson, and she talked a great deal about her despair. She talked about feeling hopeless. Not only that, at the end of most of her letters, she would write, "Dear sister, can you forgive me for writing you such a letter? I ought not to send it, for I know it will distress you, but I am so despondent sometimes. I can't write cheerfully." And she talks about the mental strain and the physical stress. She said, "I hope I can write a more cheerful letter next time. Do not cast away, but still write as often as you can to your unworthy but most loving sister." And this is a pattern that continues for quite some time for her, and it's extremely sad to see this, because she obviously was really working hard. I think just we put it the wrong way for some reason. There we go. So only the resurrection of Abijah and the opportunity to make amends for her past behavior would cure Hannah of what ailed her. However, in 1864, Hannah found respite with her brother-in-law, Dr. Dwight Daniel Hitchcock. And as I said before, he had been married to her sister Sarah. Sarah had passed away shortly after childbirth, and Hannah had also taken on the responsibility during the war of helping her brother-in-law, of course, raise her niece. And this is a very common pattern in the 19th century that we're going to see. But the two married one another. And this time period, if a gentleman married and his wife passed away, it was not uncommon for him to look to his sister's family, or his wife's family, to see if she had unmarried sisters. And since Hannah was there and close and a widow with children to care for, he was a widower living close with her niece. The two married at Fort Gibson. And for nearly 3 years, Hannah found happiness, and they lived in Fort Gibson. But marital bliss was not in Hannah's future. In 1867, during an outbreak of cholera, her husband tended to the sick at Fort Gibson and in the surrounding community who needed his care. He succumbed to the disease he valiantly battled in the community. And Hannah, in 1867, was once again a widow with children. And this is actually a photograph of Hannah and her siblings. You'll note that Hannah and her siblings obviously all lived to ripe old ages in adulthood. And Hannah would not pass away until 1917 in the community of Fort Gibson. And when she passed, her death was marked on the front pages of the local newspapers in the area, because she was described as a venerable, kind, charitable woman who had come along the Trail of Tears with her Cherokee friends, had married into the Cherokee Nation, had seen the privation and the hardship and the sufferings of war, but still lived to minister to all of those around her. And so I like to think, even though she suffered all of those things, she had the opportunity to live out her life, to see her children grow into adulthood and go on to do wonderful things. And it actually will be her children who, after her death, are going through her belongings and find a series of letters and a small, tiny little diary. It passed from one child to the next, to grandchildren, to great-grandchildren, until it made its way into the collections at the Helmrich Center for American Research at the Gilcrease Museum. Today, if you visit the Cherokee National History Museum in downtown Tahlequah and you go for a guided tour, if you were fortunate enough to have a tour docent named Jared, he is Hannah and Abijah's great-great-grandson. So, with that, I thank you, and I'm happy to take questions. Yes?
You kept mentioning Confederates.
Mm-hmm.
Were these Confederates Cherokees, or were they from someplace else?
You have a mix of Confederates who are in the Cherokee Nation at this time. Some are going to be Cherokee. There also were Choctaw and Chickasaw Confederates who were part of the troops moving through the region. But you also have Confederate troops who come in from Missouri and Arkansas and Texas at different times and are making their way through the nation. As a matter of fact, one of the best examples of that we see is on July 17th, 1863 at the Battle of Honey Springs, where we have Confederate troops out of Missouri, Arkansas, and Texas, along with Cherokee, Muskogee, and Chickasaw and Choctaw Confederate troops that fight against our Union troops who are coming out of Kansas and Missouri, but also the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd Regiments of Indian Home Guard, who are Union loyal Native soldiers from the Cherokee, the Muskogee, the Seminole, and the Osage nations. And also, so we have them, and then we also have the 1st Kansas Colored Infantry fighting in that battle. And those are individuals who had been enslaved in the Indian Territory, and with the outbreak of the war, made their way north to Kansas for security. And as soon as President Lincoln calls for bringing in colored troops, meaning African Americans or Native people, into the military, Senator James Henry Lane of Kansas puts out the call, and actually the 1st and 2nd Kansas Colored Infantry are mustered into service. They actually, if you've seen the film Glory about the 54th Massachusetts, don't believe the lie that they are the first Union colored troops to see combat. That is not true. The 1st Kansas Colored enters the field of combat against Confederates a full year ahead of the 54th Massachusetts, and they did that at the Battle of Island Mound in Missouri. So we've got a mix of Confederates coming from different areas, but we also have pro-Union Native troopers, African Americans, and whites coming in the area. We do know now at the Battle of Honey Springs, we also have pro-Confederate Hispanic troops that came up with the white Confederate Texans. We're finding that out. The more research we do in the muster rolls for the different units that were there, going through and researching the soldiers and getting to pension files and doing more research on them, we do have Hispanic troops who are a part of the Texas forces.
This murdering that was taking place, was that by just thieves?
It's by everybody. It's by pro-union. It's by pro-union supporters, pro-Confederate supporters, neutral supporters. I liken what was going on in the Five Nations to what happened between Kansas and Missouri. If you're familiar with the Bleeding Kansas era from 1854 to 61, where you've got Kansas Jayhawkers and Missouri Bushwhackers going back and forth across the border, and they're really not, they're targeting individuals based on their beliefs, whether they are anti or pro-slavery, but they're getting anybody and everybody in between and basically raiding, pillaging, and plundering for their own profit. And so what happens when the Civil War breaks out, that conflict that was taking place between Missouri and Kansas is kind of given some legal sanction and cover by war. And so it continues. I mean, how many times does William Clark Quantrell go in and burn Lawrence? Yeah. Several times during the course of the war, simply because he can. There's a power vacuum. Here, there's a power vacuum as well. And so especially when the Union abandons Fort Gibson, early in the war, the Confederates come in and take over. And so now Confederate raiders in particular, who are attached to military units and who are not, are basically kind of given the green light to go ahead and do whatever they want. What's fascinating is doing some more research into Abijah's murder, it is said that he is murdered by the Pin Indians. Well, the Pins are pro-Union Cherokees. Abijah was pro-Union. Come to find out, an individual that Hannah and her husband had thought was a friend, who they had taken into their home many times, he actually provided information to a group of Pins and indicated that Abijah was really not loyal to the Union, and he basically instigated that murder. He was hoping that he would be able to most likely get Abijah and Hannah's property and things that they had for himself. And that individual, I can tell you by the close of the war, he himself falls victim to thievery, banditry, and murder. So I guess karma does come back around. Yes, sir?
Is your article on this published or to be published somewhere such as the Chronicles of Oklahoma?
Not yet. I want to do some more work on it. I actually want to be able to sit down with Jared and interview him. I want to hear what narratives have been passed down through the family, through oral tradition. I want to do some more digging into Union and Confederate records, and also some things within the Cherokee Nation before I go ahead and publish. I've got a couple of other articles that are in the process that I need to get done first before I lose myself in this and completely become engulfed.
And where will those be?
Well, I have an article I'm working on currently about a full-blood Seminole man who was kidnapped from the streets of St. Augustine, Florida in the 1830s and used as enslaved labor on sailing ships. And then he comes back to the United States, makes his way to Philadelphia, where the Presbyterian Mariners Association Church kind of befriends him. They educate him, and then their idea is, hey, in the Indian Territory, the Seminole are the most unruly, and they are the ones who do not want missionaries in schools. What if we get this guy to convert and become a Presbyterian and send him with our missionaries because he can speak the language? He's one of them. His name is Ustikoluchi. He's also called Talamas Miko. His English name is John Douglas Bimo Sr. And so I have an article I'm writing about him for the Chronicles of Oklahoma. And then I actually have an article I'm working on about two different women, two white women from Ohio that come to the Indian Territory, and one in the 1850s, one in the 1870s. And they both are connected to Presbyterian boarding schools, one in the Choctaw Nation, one in the Muskogee Nation, and how they use what we call religious and domestic maternalism to try to convert young Native students. And both women do something really kind of a bit unthinkable in that they marry full-blood Native men. So when Hannah marries Abijah, Abijah comes from a prominent mixed-blood family. And so in the 19th century, for a white woman to marry any man outside of her race was a huge taboo. We had massive hang-ups about race, and especially when it came to white women. The cult of domesticity that kind of ordered women's lives basically said that women had to be chaste and pure, and that meant that you stayed in relationships with men in your own racial grouping. If you looked outside of that, then you were considered impure. And so obviously Hannah is marrying Abijah, but he's mixed blood. So that is seen as a little more acceptable because there's white blood in him. But the two women I'm looking at, one a woman, her name is Harriet, and she ends up marrying a full-blood Choctaw gentleman who will go on to become principal chief of the Choctaw Nation, and his name is Reverend Allen Wright. He is the gentleman that actually gives the name to the state of Oklahoma, out of the Choctaw language, meaning land of the red people. The other is a young woman named Katie, who is at the Tallahassee Mission, and she actually marries the son of Reverend John Douglas Bimo Sr., and that young man is half Muskogee, half Seminole. And so I'm writing about these two women's experiences coming here, marrying Native men who are full-blood at a time when that is considered taboo. Both of them experienced difficulties with their families. Both of the women's families pretty much shut down communication and for periods of time disowned both of them. And so, and just so you know, here in Oklahoma, especially within the community of historians and the creation of amazing archives of Native resources, it will actually be the granddaughter of Harriet and Alan Wright. Her name is Muriel H. Wright. And if you've been to the Oklahoma Historical Society and looked in any of their collections, Muriel H. Wright was one of the most avid collectors and individuals who went out actively seeking historical materials and sources on Native peoples in Oklahoma at a time when no one was doing that work. So the Native history collections we have at the OHS really are largely thanks to her labors. And it was partially to help remember and commemorate her grandfather's work as a Choctaw leader and as someone who promoted the advancement of Native people. So I've got those. The article on John B. Moe Sr. is looking at the chronicles. The article on the two women is going to be sent to the Western Historical Quarterly, which is the publication of the Western History Association.
Thank you.
So I have lots of stuff in the works, along with my book project. So that's what we do as university professors. We have lots of projects we have to do. So.
What kind of classes do you teach right now?
I teach a mix. My lower level courses are American history, the survey courses. I teach the first half that goes from pre-colonial contact through the end of Reconstruction, which is 1877. I teach Native American history. I teach a broad survey course, but then I teach specialty courses in Native American history. And then I also teach the American West. And we have some Civil War courses on the books, which I'm hoping to be able to teach occasionally. And I also teach public history. I coordinate the public history certificate at Northeastern State University, and that gets history students who want to have a history major. It trains them for jobs outside of teaching, and so it gets them ready to work in museums, archives, and different places where we use history to engage with the public. So I teach a public history course that introduces them to museums, archives, historic preservation, all of those different kinds of careers that are available if you want to have a history degree but not go in a classroom.
I have a question.
Yes.
How old were you, and when did your light bulb go off that you were going to be a historian and want to do this?
When I was in middle school, I was in middle school. I grew up with, when I was a little girl, I had great-grandparents living. I had great-grandparents. I didn't lose my last great-grandparent until I was in my mid to late 20s.
Wow.
So when I was a little girl, my great-great-grandmother, she lived to be 106. And I have pictures of myself as a baby being held by her.
Wow.
I have pictures of when I'm a little toddler sitting on her lap. She was feeding me great popsicles. It made my mother mad. Because I had purple face. And so, I remember hearing the older people in my family tell stories. My grandfather in particular, my grandfather Francis, used to tell stories about his father, who came from England in the late 1880s. As a teenager, he was like 17 years old. He got on a ship in Liverpool, came in through Ellis Island, and joined his brothers who were already in Michigan. And so when I listened to my grandfather tell those stories, he remembered his father's accent, and so he would mimic his father's accent. So when he would tell his father's stories, well, my father used to say, and he'd slip into that voice. And so I also grew up, my grandmothers on both sides, and my great-grandmother on one side of the family. We used to go every May, and we had to go decorate graves before Memorial Day. Oh, it's time to decorate. It's time for Decoration Day. And so I would go with both sides, and I had one grandmother who would go ahead and we'd go to the cemetery literally across the street from their house, and we'd take everything in the car, and we would be putting the new potting soil in the planter and digging and planting. And so she would say, now this is so-and-so, and let me tell you about so-and-so. And she would tell you about that person. And over the years, both grandmothers gave a lot of family heirlooms to my mother. When my mother passed away, it's now come to me. Routinely, my father, I'll just come home and there's a box on the doorstep. I'm like, oh, Dad sent me a box. Like recently he sent me a box and it had all these bags of silverware. But there are these typed notes in there from one of my grandmothers, and she had the stories about this set of spoons belonged to so-and-so, and they were bought, and she has all these notes. And so I was very fortunate that I had family members who cared about talking about family history. And so for me, then I connected family history to community, and then community to state, and state to nation. And so, yeah, I've been doing this. It's the only thing I ever wanted to do. When I told my parents I was going to get a history degree at college, my dad shook his head. My dad himself, an educator, a teacher, he taught 6th grade science, and he looked at me and said, you might as well get a degree in underwater basket weaving. What kind of job are you going to get with that? I taught at the community college level in Kansas, and then I actually started my own historical consulting company. And I did a lot of work in the TV and film industry. So I'm one of those people that goes in and looks at the women's clothing. No, this is not what they were wearing in the 1870s. No, no, no. Or, no, that is not 1830s, that is 1890s. You need to get this right here. Because being correct matters. And so I did a lot of work like that. I do a lot of what we call first-person living history interpretation, where I wear the clothing and I become the person. And I have to honestly say, it's not out of the realm of possibility after I speak to Jared. I don't want to portray his great-great-grandmother without permission. And I've gotten to know him better over the last couple of years. And so I can completely see myself in a worn-out work dress from the Civil War era, sitting and writing and portraying his grandmother over at Fort Gibson, because she was in that area. And yeah, I mean, we don't know who we are as a nation today and where we're going in the future if we don't know our past.
Amen.
And we have to understand that past. And we have to understand all of its facets, whether we like those facets or not.
Right.
We can't cover those facets up. We have to understand them. We have to understand why things were the way they were, and understand how that put us as a nation on different developmental paths. I always tell my students, I will challenge you in our course. There are going to be things that you learn about you don't like. It's going to make you uncomfortable, and there's nothing wrong with that. Right. But I also tell my students, none of us today are guilty of the historical crimes that took place in the past. We're not guilty of those. However, we have a responsibility to learn about them so they do not happen again.
That's right.
And I always start my history classes. It doesn't matter what topic I'm teaching. I start them by a photographic walkthrough of the Buchenwald death camp in Germany. I've been there. And I walk them through that and I say, this is why we have to know the past. Because we don't want things like this to ever be perpetuated again. And so I walk them through that. And that first day, we go over the syllabus, we walk through Buchenwald, and they leave, and I was like, gosh, that was such a downer. I'm like, well, yeah, history can be a downer sometimes. But when I think about Hannah, yes, her diary is a real downer. But look what happens. She marries. She finds happiness for a while. After her second husband dies, she settles into rearing her children. She works with her sister. She connects, her family come back to that area, and she connects with them. And she lives a very productive, and really in her mind, a useful life. She does good things for other people. And so, so in a way, yeah, the diary's a downer, but her life on the whole is not. But she left us an extremely important window into the past that we need to open and take a look through. Yes?
Were you consulted at all for like Colors of the Fire Moon or August Osage County or any of those?
No, none of those. Those were taking place while I was working on my dissertation. And I would not consult in particular on Native culture. I believe it was very important for that project that they worked with the Osage community. It was very important. Now, if someone would have said, hey, can you consult us on what white folks were wearing? Sure, I can help you. But no, I was not involved with that project, primarily because I was not in the area. I was in Arizona, hunkered down, writing my dissertation. Wow. So I could graduate. Yes?
I was just gonna say, for those of you in the room that know me, Kay Little, and you've heard me speak, I got my start by working under Michelle, or not working under her. I told her one time I was a groupie, because I just would sit there and soak up everything that she was talking about. And so she has helped me tremendously with what I do. So she just keeps helping.
So any other questions? Thank you so much for being here. I'm so happy you were here. I'm happy that I got to share Hannah's story with you. I think it's extremely important. It's very powerful. It speaks to, I think, the testament of, the human spirit and endurance and persevering and digging in. So I think her story is very important. And so I hope that you enjoyed from it. I hope you learned from it. If you have questions, you can always reach out to me. You can just search, Michelle M. Martin, Northeastern State University, and our faculty pages should pop up, and my email's there, but my email's here. Or you can ask Shayla and the folks at the museum, and they can put you in touch. But again, and I do want to say, I always want to give thanks to individuals. I want to thank the staff at the Helmerich Center for American Research and the folks at the McFarland Library and Special Collections at the University of Tulsa. Between their two collections, I was able to put materials together. They are a fantastic resource in this region, and they do amazing work. And also thank you to Jared, and thank you to Hannah and Abijah's descendants for allowing other people to share their family members' story. I think that's important as well. So I hope you guys have a great day. If you have other questions, I'll be here for a little bit.